The morning of my daughter's wedding, I pressed my own shirt. Not because I couldn't afford to have it done. Not because the hotel didn't offer the service. I pressed it because there is something grounding about standing in a quiet room at 6 in the morning with a warm iron in your hand, watching wrinkles disappear beneath steady pressure. It calms me. It always has. My late wife used to say I ironed the way other men prayed, slowly, deliberately, as though the act itself carried meaning. I had been doing a lot of ironing that week. The wedding was at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside of Charleston. My daughter had chosen it 2 years earlier, circling it in a magazine she left on my kitchen counter during one of her rare visits. I remember picking up that magazine after she left, studying the photo, the white pavilion, the rolling hills, the kind of golden afternoon light that only exists in photographs, and thinking, she deserves this. Whatever she wants, whatever makes her happy. That had been my operating principle for 31 years. Her mother passed when my daughter was 9. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral, which is the kind of timeline that doesn't leave room for bargaining. It just takes. One day your wife is complaining about a backache, and 11 weeks later you are standing in a cemetery holding a 9-year-old girl who keeps asking you when mommy is coming back, and you realize the answer to that question is going to shape everything that comes after. I made her a promise that day. Standing there in the November cold, her small hand inside mine, I told her I would make sure she never lacked for anything. I told her she would always be safe. I told her she would have every opportunity, every door opened, every path cleared. I kept that promise. I kept it so completely, so thoroughly, that I never stopped to ask whether keeping it was the right thing to do. I drove to the vineyard alone. My daughter had made it clear, politely but unmistakably, that the morning preparations were for her side of the wedding party. Her new family. I was welcome at the ceremony, of course. I was the father of the bride. There would be a moment where I walked her down the aisle, which was traditional. And she had confirmed I would be seated at the family table, which was also traditional. Beyond that, the day had been organized around a version of her life in which I was a pleasant background figure, a footnote, with good posture. I told myself I understood. She was building her own life. That was what you raised them to do. My son-in-law came from money, old money. The quiet kind that doesn't announce itself but is present in every detail. The way he shook hands. The way he ordered wine without looking at the price. The way his family occupied a room as though the room had been waiting for them. He was not unkind to me. He was cordial in the way that people are cordial to the staff at a fine hotel. Smooth, practiced, and fundamentally indifferent. His mother had pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner the night before and told me, with a smile that never reached her eyes, that the seating arrangement had been carefully considered. I was at a table near the back of the pavilion with my daughter's college roommate, a cousin I had met twice, and 2 people whose connection to the event I never fully determined. The family table, it turned out, referred to my son-in-law's family. I sat with my carefully considered table and I drank my wine, and I watched my daughter laugh at something her new mother-in-law whispered to her, and I told myself that this was fine, that this was what success looked like, that I had raised a woman who belonged in rooms like this. The ceremony was beautiful. She was radiant. When she took my arm at the back of the pavilion and we began to walk, she squeezed my elbow once and said quietly, "Thank you, Daddy." Those 2 words were the most she had given me all day, and I held on to them. Then came the reception. There were toasts. Her maid of honor spoke. My son-in-law's best man spoke, and he was funny in the easy, confident way of men who have never been genuinely uncertain about anything. Then my son-in-law's father stood and gave a long, warm speech about his son and about welcoming my daughter into their family, and there was real tenderness in it, and I found myself genuinely moved despite everything. Then my daughter stood. She was flushed with champagne and happiness, and she looked around the room with the expression of someone who has exactly what they wanted and knows it. She thanked her maid of honor. She thanked the venue. She thanked her new in-laws by name, individually, for the ways they had welcomed her and supported her and made her feel like she belonged. Then she said, And of course, my father is here." The room applauded politely. "He drove down from Colombia," she said, and there was a ripple of something in her voice. Not cruelty exactly, but carelessness, which can be worse. "He's always been there in his own way. My dad is a simple man. He never really had much, but he always tried." More polite applause. "I think what I've learned, honestly, is that I wanted more. I wanted the kind of life where you don't have to try quite so hard just to stay in place." She raised her glass toward her new husband. "And I found it." The room erupted. Laughter, cheering, the delighted noise of people celebrating something they recognized as victory. I was sitting close enough to the family table that I could see my son-in-law's mother lean over and say something to the woman beside her. Both of them glanced at me. Neither of them looked away when I noticed. There was no embarrassment in it. I was the punchline, and they were the audience, and everyone in the room, including my daughter, had agreed on that arrangement without anyone telling me. I did not stand up. I did not raise my glass. I did not leave. I sat with my carefully considered table, and I set my champagne down very slowly, and I looked at my daughter, this person I had built my entire life around protecting, and I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Anger is hot and quick, and it passes. This was something colder and more permanent. This was the sound of a door closing on a version of myself I had been carrying for 31 years. I want to be honest with you about something because I think it matters. She did not invent herself. I helped build her. Every time she called from college and said she needed more, I gave more. Every time she came home between semesters and talked about her boyfriend's family's vacation house, their ski trips, the restaurants they went to, and I could hear the yearning in her voice, the sense that she was measuring herself against a standard I couldn't meet. I quietly moved money around to close the gap. I paid for an apartment in the kind of building where she wouldn't feel embarrassed to have her friends over. I co-signed for a car that was above anything I drove myself. I told myself I was being a good father. What I was actually doing was teaching her that the distance between where I was and where she wanted to be was something to be ashamed of, and that I agreed with her. I had been so focused on giving her everything that I had never once shown her what I actually was. That was my failure. I owned it then, and I own it now. But understanding your own role in a problem does not mean you sit quietly while someone stands in a microphone and calls you a footnote. I drove back to Colombia that evening after the dinner. I did not say a long goodbye. I found my daughter between the cake cutting and the first dance, hugged her, told her she looked beautiful, and left. She kissed my cheek and turned back to her new husband before I had taken 3 steps. On the drive home, I called my attorney. Not because I was angry, because something had clarified. Here is what my daughter did not know about me. Here is what I had been too quiet, too modest, too deliberately understated to ever show her. In 1987, when I was 26 years old, I bought a half-acre of land on the edge of what was then the industrial outskirts of Colombia. I paid $11,000 for it, which was most of what I had. My colleagues at the time thought I had lost my mind. The land was beside a rail yard. Nobody wanted it. 2 years later, I bought the parcel next to it. I was an engineer by training, but land was what I understood at a cellular level. I could look at a map of a city and see what it was going to become the way other people could look at a seed and see a tree. I was not always right, but I was right often enough. Over the next 30 years, while I drove a modest car and lived in a house I had owned since 1994 and ironed my own shirts, I assembled a portfolio of commercial real estate across South Carolina that my accountant described, when we last reviewed it together, as quietly extraordinary. 11 properties, 3 of them in downtown Charleston, where the money had been migrating steadily for 15 years. A mixed-use building on Meeting Street that I had purchased in 2003 for reasons that had seemed borderline irrational at the time. A warehouse complex near the port that I had converted into the kind of loft offices that technology companies would spend the next decade competing to rent. I had never told my daughter any of this. I told myself it was because I didn't want her to feel entitled. I told myself I was protecting her, letting her build her own confidence, her own identity. I told myself a lot of things over a lot of years. The truth was simpler. I kept it secret because some part of me believed that if she knew, She would see me differently, not as her simple, trying hard father, but as a man with standing. And I wanted to be loved for the trying, not the standing. I wanted to matter to her the way I actually was, not the way my balance sheet said I was. That was a vanity. A quiet, sentimental vanity that cost both of us something real. My attorney's name is Marcus. He has handled my affairs for 19 years. He is precise and unsentimental, and he very rarely offers opinions unless asked, which is exactly what I need in an attorney. I called him at 8:30 on a Saturday night, and he answered on the second ring. "I need you to look at the leases on the Meeting Street building," I said. There was a brief pause. "All of them?" "Specifically the one for Hartwell Creative Group." Another pause. "This one longer. That's your son-in-law's company. I know whose company it is. They've been a tenant for 4 years. Lease is up for renewal and I could hear him pulling it up. 60 days. I won't be renewing it." The silence that followed was the silence of a professional man choosing his words carefully. "The space is premium square footage. We'll have no trouble filling it. I just want to make sure you've considered." "Marcus." "Right. I'll prepare the non-renewal notice." "Thank you. I want to pause here and tell you what I was not doing. I was not trying to destroy my son-in-law. I was not trying to punish my daughter. I had no interest in anyone's ruin. What I was doing was something more specific. I was refusing, for the first time in 31 years, to be invisible. Hartwell Creative Group occupied the entire 4th floor of my Meeting Street building. They had built their brand identity around that address, used it in their marketing, their client proposals, their social media. The building was a character in their story. My son-in-law had mentioned it at the rehearsal dinner, actually, talking about how the space had transformed his company's credibility with high-end clients. He described the building with the proprietary warmth of someone who believed, on some level, that nice things naturally belonged to people like him. He did not know that the man he had placed at a table near the back of his wedding pavilion owned the floor under his Herman Miller chairs. The non-renewal notice went out on a Tuesday, 12 days after the wedding. Marcus sent it through proper legal channels, signed by the property management company Harland Property Holdings, which was the name on all my commercial leases. Harland was my middle name. Nobody had ever asked. My son-in-law called my daughter first. She called me on a Thursday. "Dad." Her voice had a quality I had not heard from her in years, stripped of its polish. "Dad, something's happening with the office." "What do you mean?" "Apparently the building is not renewing their lease. The landlord, some company, Harland, something they're not renewing. They need to be out in 60 days. "That's a short timeline," I said. "It's going to be a disaster. The Meeting Street address is everything for them. Do you know how hard it is to find comparable space downtown right now?" Her voice was gathering speed, the way it always did when she was upset. "And the timing, they just got a new contract, a big one. And the client specifically cited the office location as part of why they..." She stopped. "I need to know if you have any contacts. Anyone in real estate down here who might be able to help them find something fast." I let a moment pass. "I might know someone," I said. "Really?" The relief in her voice was immediate and enormous. "Oh my God, Dad. That would be yes. Yes, please. If you can make a call, let me look into a few things first," I said. "I'll get back to you." I did not call anyone. I had some thinking to do. Here is the part that the anger and revenge version of this story would skip over, because it doesn't fit the narrative. It's the part I am least proud of, and the most important. In the 2 weeks after the wedding, I went back over the years, and I tried to see them clearly. Not the story I had been telling myself, the devoted single father, the selfless provider, but the actual record. And what I saw was this. I had given my daughter everything except the one thing she actually needed, which was a father who showed up as a whole person. I had given her money and absence, resources and distance. I had worked and saved and built and grown an empire that she knew nothing about. And then I had stood in the back of her life like a stagehand who believes that invisibility is the same as virtue. She had filled that absence with something. She had decided, In the way that children decide things not consciously, not cruelly, but completely. That I was the version of me she could see. The pressed shirt and the modest car and the Columbia house and the trying so hard. And she had decided that was not enough. And I had let her decide that, year after year, by never once contradicting her. So yes, I was going to let the lease situation play out. I was going to stop being invisible, but I was not going to pretend that I had no part in how we had arrived here. I called my daughter back on a Sunday afternoon, 3.5 weeks after the non-renewal notice. "I need to tell you something," I said. "Can you meet me in Charleston?" She came alone, without my son-in-law, which told me she had some sense that this conversation was for the two of us. We met at a restaurant I had chosen, not fancy, just good, the kind of place where the tables are far enough apart that a real conversation can happen. She looked tired. The last few weeks had been hard on her. I could see it. I ordered coffee. She ordered water and then changed it to coffee. For a minute or so, we talked about nothing. Then she said, "Dad, I really need some good news about this lease situation. They're running out of time." Said, "Dad, I know. Do you have a contact or not? Because if you don't, I own the building." She stopped. The word that came out of her next was not a word, exactly. It was a sound. The sound of a person's mental architecture shifting on its foundation. "I'm sorry?" "Harland Property Holdings. Harland is my middle name. I've owned that building since 2003, along with 10 other commercial properties in the state, including 3 others in Charleston." I kept my voice level. Not cold, not warm, just factual. I've been a commercial real estate investor for almost 40 years. It's what I've been doing, quietly, since before you were born. She stared at me. The coffee sat untouched between her hands. "I don't understand," she said. Finally, Why didn't you ever tell you?" I looked at her. I've been asking myself that question for 30 years, and I think I finally have an honest answer. I wanted you to love me for who I appeared to be, not for what I had. And somewhere along the way, that quiet decision became a habit, and the habit became a wall, and I built it so well that you couldn't see over it. I paused, and without meaning to, I also built a version of me in your head that you could be embarrassed by. I helped build that too. I want you to know that I know that. My daughter's eyes were wet. She was not a crier, she had gotten that from me. And the fact that she was struggling told me the weight of this was real. "What you said at the reception," I said, carefully, "hurt me. I need you to know that. Not because you said I didn't have much, but because you seemed genuinely ashamed. And I have thought about why that is. And I believe I have to take responsibility for a significant portion of it." "Dad, let me finish." I was gentle but firm. "I also need you to know that I'm done being invisible. Not because I want to punish anyone. Not because of the lease, that decision was business. And Marcus will work something out with them at fair market terms, which I've already instructed him to do." I watched her absorb that. "But I am 63 years old, and I have worked and built something real, and I will not spend whatever years I have left pretending to be a footnote in my own life." She put her hand over her mouth. "I love you," I said. "I have loved you since the minute you were born, and I have never stopped. And every foolish thing I did, every time I gave you too much too easily, every time I stayed quiet about who I actually was, all of it came from love. Misguided love sometimes, but love." I picked up my coffee cup. The question going forward is what we do with that. The silence that followed was a long one. Outside the window, the Charleston afternoon was doing what Charleston afternoons do: gold light, Spanish moss, the slow, beautiful drift of a city that has survived worse than our particular drama. She cried. Not dramatically, just tears, running down, and she let them go without wiping them away right away, which meant they were real. "I was awful to you," she said. "You were." "Yes, at my own wedding." She shook her head. In front of I didn't even think about it when I was saying it. I wanted them to like me. His family. I wanted them to think I fit. I know. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed. It isn't. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her since she was a teenager. Open, stripped down, the way people look when they have stopped performing and started actually being present in a conversation. "Who are you?" she said, and she almost laughed saying it. "I mean that seriously. I feel like I am meeting you." "You are?" "A little," I said. "I'm a 63-year-old man who pressed his own shirt on the morning of your wedding and drove 40 minutes to watch you get married and sat at whatever table they put him at, because he was raised to believe that showing up quietly was enough." I set my cup down. It was not enough. For either of us. The drive back to Columbia that evening was different from the one 3 weeks earlier. Same road. Same distance. But the quality of the silence in the car was entirely different. That earlier silence had been the silence of a man swallowing something, compressing it, making himself smaller to accommodate the space he had been assigned. I had been doing that for decades without noticing. You practice something long enough, and it stops feeling like practice. It just feels like who you are. This silence was different. It was the silence of a man who had finally said what was true, and was now simply driving home through the South Carolina evening, watching the light die over the pines, not needing anything to be different than it was. My daughter and I have talked 4 times in the weeks since that coffee. Real conversations. Not the pleasant weather variety we had been trading for years. She asked me about the properties, where, when, how, and I told her, in detail for the first time. She asked about her mother, about those early years when I was building and saving, and what that time felt like. And I told her things I had not spoken aloud in decades. She listened in the way that people listen when they are genuinely trying to understand something, rather than waiting for their turn to speak. She also apologized again. Properly, without qualifications attached to it. I accepted. My son-in-law and I have spoken once, briefly. Marcus negotiated a new lease arrangement at current market rate, which is considerably higher than what they had been paying my previous below-market terms. I now recognized had been another form of the same invisible generosity that had served none of us well. He was stiff and a little formal, which I understood. That relationship will take longer. I am patient. I am also, as it turns out, the owner of a mixed-use building on Meeting Street, a warehouse complex near the port, and 9 other commercial properties across South Carolina. I have an attorney named Marcus who answers his phone on Saturday nights. I have pressed shirts and a house in Columbia, and a daughter who is beginning, slowly and genuinely, to know who I am. The morning after I had coffee with my daughter, I got up early and ironed a shirt. It was a reflex, and then it wasn't. Standing there in the early light, feeling the warmth of the iron, watching the wrinkles smooth out under steady pressure, I thought about what my wife used to say, that I ironed the way other men prayed. I think what she meant was that I was a man who believed in the slow, deliberate application of effort. That I believed things could be made right if you were patient and steady and kept your hands moving. She was right about that. She was also right, in ways I am only now fully understanding, that some things need to be said out loud, that silence is not always strength, that the people who love you cannot love the version of you that you have decided to hide. I am 63 years old. I lost my wife when she was 38 and my daughter when she was 9. And then I lost my daughter again, more slowly, over the next 22 years, to a silence I chose. I am not interested in losing anything else to that particular habit. I am still a quiet man. I will probably always be a quiet man. But there is a difference between the silence of a man who has nothing to say and the silence of a man who has decided, carefully and on purpose, that this moment does not require words. I know the difference now. And the people in my life are beginning to know it too.